it feels as though what this situation today calls for might really be some sense of being able to hold the whole. You know, we're in such a fascinating time. Do you know what I mean? This is, wow, the world is tilting on its axis today. And I think it's nice for us to be big enough to include all of that somehow. So that's my hope. I think gradually, not necessarily right from the very beginning, it became clear that Bert Hellinger was talking about at least 3 very distinct ways of understanding the flow of life that human beings are part of. He placed a very big emphasis on our personal systems because all of us come from families, and life comes to us through our having come from families. That's an unavoidable way in which life arrives, and we belong to it. And so all the orders of love relate to that, you know, the ones that are to do with finding your right place, including everybody, making sure that everybody in the family has a place, looking at the sort of deep spiritual mechanics of exchange, and how everything that is faced and included and honoured enriches at whatever cost it enriches, and everything that isn't faced and honoured and included is passed on, so that later generations and other people then carry burdens in order to serve the wholeness of that personal system. And he gave us a lot of opportunity to actually physically, somatically experience what being in the right place meant, and what including history meant, and what feeling the blessings and the power of the ancestral line could do for us. So that's what people who've done their family training know an awful lot about. But he went on and he said there's another conscience that guards us, which is much more complicated because we don't feel it in the same way. We feel the personal conscience. You know. Anyway, he went on and he talked about these wider systems which are not, they don't have the same boundaries. There's an absolute boundary in a family system. But in systems, the larger systems, work systems, tribal systems, communities, national, etc., these boundaries are more flexible. And whereas the function of the family system is to ensure belonging and survival, because we have to belong, the function of these wider systems is to ensure continuity. So that if you are in an organization and every single person in that organization can change, the organization remains. Systems are capable of continuity, whether it's, you know, America even. Continuity is what guides it, and the history and the issues of exchange and so on carry on. You know, everything that we take that we don't return is passed on to the next generation, and we can see this with climate and so on. Everything is either in balance. If it's in static balance, things die. If it's in dynamic balance, life carries on. Then he went on later in his life, Bert, to talk about a third system, which really was about not belonging or continuity, but the need for and the capacity for destruction. Sure, there are a lot of other ways of describing it, but he called it the spirit mind. I think Jan Jakob has talked about it, Jan Jakob Stam, as a sort of flow of energy which is so enormous that it would be foolish for us to think we could intervene in it, that things just change, things disappear and other things reappear. And our relationship to it is, we take the greatest strength if we can find the truest relationship to it, not to change it, but to live with it in the best way we can. And it's these huge destructive forces that we're living with, we're much more aware of now, whether it's climate change or the virus or whatever. So we've got personal system and the larger system and the kind of meta systems, you could say. And what he did and what we learn, what I have learned, is that there are certain lenses that we didn't invent. They're not just constructed by human beings, they're found by human beings. And they enable us to find order in what otherwise can look very disorderly. Life is easy to think of as totally chaotic. And they are to do with inclusion, precedence, time and space, and the precision of place, and the precision of how much history, how long history affects us, not forever, but it does affect us. The business of exchange, because it's so central to the maintenance of balance over space and time. And the fact that everything we do has a cost and a consequence. Now, these are really huge ideas. They sound, as I've put them, like quite a neat little batch you could learn before breakfast. But I can tell you that, it doesn't matter how many years I spend on this, the depth of these ideas grows. They're like pools that don't have a bottom to them. And they don't grow a lot either, they are sufficient. And when we connect to them, what is extraordinary is that we move into a kind of spiritual, sticky, sacred space. And that's what, even on Zoom, and even though we don't know each other, and even, that's what began to happen yesterday. So there is something rather blissful about this work, in that as well as it being a tool for us to be of service to people and organizations, it's a massive tool for ourselves. It's a massive tool for ourselves to deal with these issues that you felt really freighted by, weighted down by. We just happen to be in a period probably equivalent to the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, where species extinction and climate change and the breakdown of an economy which is posited on growth and all these things, and the freedom of exchange through social media, and all these things have reached a point where they can't find balance. They've completely gone off the map of balance. And we can be incredibly indignant about it, and many of us are. And we can mitigate its effects in the ways that we care passionately about. But we probably also have to bow to the power of it. It's only when we do that we can find out what is possible. And it's very difficult when we belong to a culture that enjoins us. The culture that we're loyal to says there is a solution. It's an upbeat, can-do. That's why you're employed as coaches, really, isn't it? It's to support the upbeat, can-do thing. And downbeat and can't-do takes you into your world of melancholy. I think it all belongs together. Look at autumn as the time for things dying. And actually, because it happens so often, we trust that this dying process leads to something else. There is a spring. We don't know about what some of these other dying processes are going to lead to, except that they do, and they always have. We don't know if we'll be there for them, but they do. So I think we are, if we can bear it, we're looking at the biggest questions there are to look at. When I talk about bowing down, that's far too simple. There are governments, there are people with power and responsibility, and some of us can affect those, play a part. Well, should I go on? Are you happy for me to go on? And I couldn't do this work if certain very difficult things hadn't happened to me, which had required me to do the amount of digesting that I've done that enables me to talk to you like this today. And I'm at peace with that. One's not necessarily at peace with these things immediately, but you can see costs and consequences is where it's at. Everything, every single thing is at. Nothing falls outside of it. As you say, everything you said had a cost and a consequence. Well, we're talking about big things. You see, I am imagining that most of you have some kind of spiritual practice. It's not such an unusual thing to have these days, whether it comes from a formal, recognized church or school, or whether you find it through reading or music or nature or running or whatever. But what I understand spirituality to be, if I look at all of these together, is a journey towards, it's an expansive process, it's a journey towards wholeness. We know that the field is a unified entity, and we know that we don't live it like that. It's not possible. That's the fall that happened when we ate the apple. You fall from the grace of that wholeness. And we also, in a way, as more can rely on an extraordinary level of benign support. I don't know how many of you think like this, but biologically, it is a complete miracle that life exists. If the way the world planet was organized was a few degrees lower or higher, or if it was a few degrees further away from the sun or nearer, or had slightly different elements, or if the trade winds went in a slightly different direction, blah, 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 there would not be any life. And there certainly wouldn't be our life. And so there is something about the way that life, in a big sense, is organized into day and night and everything that is extraordinarily benign. And it's something we can rely on if we know how to tune into it. I think it's what people often mean when they say God. It is that benign force. It's not to say that it's kind all the time, but that its depths are benign. So when we tune into this, we make contact, which I think most of you did, with some sense of what's sacred. That's also what people love to touch into in their spiritual life. And it all boils down to love, because love really is the unguarded inclusion of everything. It takes us back into the unified field. So when I asked you to open your hearts to each of the faces that you were seeing, you were moving towards love. That's what love is. It just says yes. Right? And there is an austerity to this too, because it doesn't like flakiness. You know, it really, spirituality requires truth. And one of the lovely things about constellation work is that it bypasses, it rides roughshod over people's ideas and takes you through representative participation into what is more true. We're always taking you into what is more true and what is bigger, because it's including more. So truth in itself has this kind of sacred quality. It has its own beauty. Truth and beauty belong together. If there are any universal values, I think that's what they are. And this way of working ultimately requires that we make a respectful space for everything. We know that when we operate with respect to ourselves and to other people, the crisp characterological carapaces that we're stuck in begin to melt. I was watching, I don't know if any of you have been involved in Thomas Hugel's global conference on intergenerational trauma. He's been running, but he interviewed a Pakistani woman who has made films interviewing Nazis, neo-Nazis and jihadists and people from ISIS. And they're very daring work indeed. But what she demonstrated was that if she really, really, really listened to these people and honored them and gave them space and went deep enough and didn't jump in with any reaction, they began to feel heard and respected. And the thing they were attached to, which was a substitute for that, which was a belief system, no longer held sway. And one by one, they mostly gave up their positions. It took years, often, didn't happen to everybody. But it was an extraordinarily moving demonstration of what it means to deeply listen and respect people as searchers for belonging. In the way that Bert talked about it, he said, the place from which we have to work systemically is a meta place. And the benignness of God, maybe, delivers it to us, whether we deserve it or not, actually, just by the fact that we are occupying that space. So we now have 4 layers of feeling. I know Ed is going to teach you a lot more about all these different types of feeling, but we have these secondary feelings which make us weak, which is what swells around a lot of the time. We have primary feelings which support movement, which is what we're given and can look after from birth. We have systemic feelings, which the way systems work often require us to carry for other people. And we learn a way of being able to recognize these and give them back. So those are the 3 feelings that you see in operation in the constellation. But the facilitator has access to what he calls meta feelings. And they are feelings that have pure strength to them. So they sound the same, there's meta love and meta clarity and meta courage, meta anger, meta grief, reverence, cruelty. It's probably a lot more, but those are the ones that have they carry something slightly godlike in their purity and their impersonalness. And you know, if you want a really safe surgical operation, you wouldn't choose necessarily a very kind bedside manner sort of a practitioner, doctor. You would want somebody who knew about metta cruelty, you know, who was capable of taking the knife and cutting perfectly into your beautiful body, exactly the way it needed to be done, without going ouch, you know, or without worrying about anything else. They were doing it in the service of the thing they were meant to be doing. Now, my feeling is that when you talked yesterday about feeling a bit under-resourced for life, for the particular lives that you were living, are living yesterday, it was as if you were saying you were a little too far away from that metta energy. So I wanted to spend a bit of this morning now giving you some really direct experiences of it. I do want you, if you can, to get a pencil and piece of paper. But I'm just going to give you some of these words, these metta energy words. Okay? There's love, clarity, courage, anger, grief, reverence, and cruelty. There's 7 of them, I think. And we're going to stop soon and take a quarter of an hour's break. And during the quarter of an hour's break, I would like you to do the following. I'd like you to write these on 6, 7 separate pieces of paper. They don't have to be beautiful or have lovely handwriting or anything. It's just, they are places of representation of these qualities. And you can either just do that and then go and have your tea, or you can do that and you can also just see what happens if you put your hand down on them. Just see what happens as you make connection with these metta qualities. It might help for you to put the word metta in front of them, just so that you don't accidentally slip into the other kinds. Do you see what I mean? So you might want to write metta love, metta clarity, so on. Well, the nature of it really is that it's pure strength, and it's, even though it's a feeling, it has no emotionality to it. It's an energy that you can access, that certain conditions might benefit from you accessing. This is the stance. Our capacity to have a stance which enables us to constellate requires that we respect and recognize and have access to these metta qualities. Yeah, because otherwise we can't be fearless. All other versions of these feelings set off fear. I'm sure you can just look at them and feel afraid, you know, if you don't think of them in that metta quality. When we're afraid, we shrink.